All right, everyone. Let's have a little talk about sleeve and core, namely tightness in sleeve versus tightness in core. And if you're not familiar with these terms, these are terms that I think are used more in the structural integration world, in that system or that modality. Sleeve usually refers to kind of superficial tissue. I'm not going to go into fascia or superficial fascia or anything like that, but sleeve normally refers to kind of superficial tissue, and core could refer to deeper layers or layers that may be kind of responsible for more deeper functions. And what I mean by that is sometimes we can look at it as extrinsic versus intrinsic, or we can look at it as phasic versus tonic. So sometimes deeper postural muscles versus more superficial action muscles. But to simplify it, let's look at it and think about it as sleeve being superficial and core being kind of deep. Let's think about tightness between the two, right? And in a lot of structural integration teachings, we're taught to work superficial first before we go into core. So we go into sleeve first and bring out any resolutions there before we go into core tissue. And an example of that might be something like working serratus anterior to bring up a muscle. Serratus anterior might be more under the category of sleeve, whereas adductors might fall more into the category of core, right? So we might work something akin to serratus anterior before we worked something like some adductor group. And I'm not saying that in SI you go to serratus anterior before adductors. I'm just using these muscles as an example. So in the SI world, we think of it this way, right? Go here before here, right? In Morales method, in MASI, Morales Method Academy of Structural Integration, we acknowledge this possibility, but we think of it a little differently. And we think of it within the context of this concept called adaptive capacity. And without getting too much into the weeds of adaptive capacity, it's really about, does the client have the capacity to take on, work in one area before you go into another area? All right, pretty simple. So when we think about sleeve and core in MASI, in Morales method, we also think about adaptive capacity, and we ask ourselves the question, is it possible that a client could actually receive work in a core territory in an early session? Instead of having to wait for a middle session or a later session to get into core territory. We also ask ourselves the question, is it possible that in one territory or one group that a client could receive sleeve work and then core work and then possibly sleeve work? So for example, in a territory, is it possible that we might be superficial in one area, possibly deeper in another area, possibly superficial in a different area? And if you just think about these possibilities, yes, it's possible that someone could require work such as that in some territory. So if we think about this concept, then it kind of pokes a lot of holes in the other concept of sleeve before core, because it's possible that someone could use a session that has sleeve, core, sleeve type of work, right? And it could be very early on in a series. Could be first session or second session. We wouldn't have to wait until fourth or fifth session. So as you can tell, then, MASI starts to kind of slice things a little differently and starts to look at things a little differently. This is one of the, I guess, unique things about MASI and how we just decide to slice things up. And how would we know if we go to sleeve and then core and then sleeve, right? Well, that also then brings us to the concepts of palpation and how in the Morales method as a whole, we look at tissue, we work tissue, we think about end range, we think about directional resistance, directional ease, and we think about all these variations. So in that instance, we start to work a territory very much tailored to the client and very much tailored to the client's tissue and how it could respond, whether there's a end range that maybe is up here, and then in another area, there's an end range that is a little deeper in. So in that case, then we start to tailor a session more towards the client's tissue rather than some structure or policy of sleeve before core. So, in Mossy, we don't say sleeve and core, sleeve tightness and core tightness are thinking of it that way is bad. We don't think of it, we don't say that. We think that it's another approach to things, but we do look at things differently, right? And sleeve tightness and core tightness kind of don't show up in our vernacular. Instead, end range and directional resistance. My hope is that although we look at things a little differently, we are still coming to a same outcome as classic SI modalities do, mainly because we still have the same philosophies, such as adaptive capacity, as classic structural integration modalities do. So, kind of deep, right? Even if you're not familiar with structural integration and you maybe don't understand fully all of this like word salad that I just threw out, I like to share this because I want people to get a sense of how deep structural integration is, how much thought there is to this type of work, how much thought a practitioner of structural integration, of true, real structural integration, how much thought an SI practitioner is putting into creating a session for the client and creating a series for the client, creating a whole kind of story arc of a series for the client. There's a lot of thought that goes into this. So just wanted to share that in that sense. So that's it, folks. I hope this helped. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comment section below. And I hope to see you in the future.